Hello, let us continue our reading of the poem Preludes by T.S. Eliot. In our last lecture, I have completed the first section. There was a particular kind of a description about the evening, the winter evening settling down, and there was a huge amount of representations that have been made by T.S. Eliot regarding the decadence that is perceptible throughout London. So let us continue our reading with the second stanza of this particular poem. As you can see that this particular section, that is Preludes 2, or the second prelude, it begins with the morning that is being considered to be present here. The morning twilight described by Baudelaire, as I mentioned in the poem that is Morning Twilight by him, has wonderfully parallels with Eliot's second prelude, as we can see here, which begins in the streets and moves towards the furnished rooms. As you can see that the poem actually begins in this particular fashion. The morning comes to consciousness. So the question certainly arises when it indicates, that is, the poem actually indicates that the morning comes to consciousness. Does it implicate that when it was the matter with the night, there was a particular kind of unconsciousness? Number one. And if it is matter with the unconscious, then as you can see that so far as the Freudian psychological perspectives are concerned, we find that the unconscious is generally being considered to be the main or the most important part of human psyche. Why? Because within the unconscious, all the matters of repressions actually got stored. So far as the human psyche is concerned, as you can know that there is a the conscious level, the subconscious level, or preconscious level, and the unconscious level. So if you have to judge any particular human being, if you have to judge the temperament, if you have to judge the behavior and the actual thing, it is something apart from the masquerades, then you will find that the unconscious is the actual part that can provide you the basic impressions regarding the human psyche, or the basis of the human behavior. Now, what happens, that when Eliot is writing that the morning comes to consciousness, then ultimately you will find that in our conscious self, we become very much alert regarding our mind, or regarding our mindset, and so. So fundamentally, you will find that when it is the matter with the consciousness, you will find that it is actually indicating towards the masks or the masquerades. That means what it says, that the morning comes to consciousness, that means you are preparing yourself to wear the masks. That means you are preparing for behaving in a different way. That means it must not show your actual temperament, it must not show your actual mind or your actual thought. It says the morning comes to consciousness of faint stale smells of beer. So you can find the same kind of olfactory images that have been taken for consideration in the first prelude. It has been continuing in this one. In the first prelude, there was the smell of steaks, and now you can find here the faint, stale smells of beer. One thing that I have to say here, that fundamentally with the particular reference to the olfactory images that Eliot is propagating here, you can find that Eliot is pointing towards the particular term you see here, the stale smells. Okay, so the question is the matter of freshness, okay, the matter of purity, all these things have been completely being negated by Eliot here. The stale smells of beer, it is again indicating towards the remnants of the past, you see, because it is actually indicating towards the particular kind of activities that have been done in the night, and now it is morning, it is comes to consciousness, and ultimately you will find that the remaining part of the beer, the smells that are stale, as you can see, it is not fresh. The smells of beer is always being associated, or always being related with the morning, as you can see here. So the morning comes to consciousness of faint stale smells of beer, and from the sawdust trampled street, okay, again you can find a kind of an ugly interpretations or ugly description has been made, the sawdust trampled street. So you can find that in the previous night, if we can relate to the first prelude with the second one, then we can find in the previous evening there was a particular reference to the rain, and now you can refer to the sawdust trampled street. So ultimately you can feel that it is not specifically that particular type of London that we find in the greater Perth. It is not a kind of a romantic description of a city. Rather, you can find that each and every kind of ugliness is always being associated with these kinds of descriptions. Why the sawdust trampled street, this particular implication has been given? Probably it is considering, it is indicating towards the industrial forms. Right. So fundamentally, whenever, as we have found that in the typical neoclassical period, or the period before neoclassical period, that is the Elizabethan and Jacobean England, you will find that the fundamental focus was always given with the kings and queens and the aristocrats and the upper strata of society. But whenever you are entering into the modern period, you will find that the focus is always being vested to the negative aspects of the society to some extent. Okay, you will find the working class, you will find the prostitutes. In place of love affairs, there you can find the frustrated love affairs. In place of the upper strata of society, you can find the lower strata of society. In place of ultimately, you will find the typical kind of fashionable world. There is a kind of a corruption that is inherent, that have been described in the modern period, specifically by T.S. Eliot. So everywhere you can find a kind of a jump, a kind of a change, a kind of a shift is being perceptible within the subject matter, and also within the presentation of the society that the Eliot is actually pointing at. He says, therefore, the morning comes to consciousness of faint, stale smells of beer from the sawdust trampled street. So you can implicate there is also a kind of a smell that is coming from the sawdust. You can feel its essences. You can feel the sawdust in your leg or so. So from the sawdust trampled street, with all its muddy feet that press to early coffee stands. So that is a kind of a description. As I have already mentioned, that Eliot will not describe any particular society in detail. Rather, you will get some snapshots will be taken, right? And these snapshots will propagate. These snapshots will provide the essential thing that Eliot is trying to point out, you see. That is the negative aspects of the society. That is, it is not to be, it is not to be likened by you, or like by you. So from the sawdust trampled street with all its muddy feet, again, you will find, as I've mentioned earlier, it is not the typical totalitarian, holistic concept that Eliot is providing here. The speaker says that somehow it is the feet that have been pointed out. I have already mentioned about the disjointed part of human body. That is, at one moment you cannot take a look of the whole body or whole body structure of human beings. Rather, it is the disjointed parts. That's why here you can find the feet. In the next stanza, you will find the soles. Now here you can find the hands. So fundamentally, you will find that as if the whole human body has been looked through the perforated sheet, and these have been described here. This is actually indicating towards the modern theories of fragmentations, and fragmentations within the society, fragmentation within the culture, and here you can find the fragment is also being associated in terms of the bodily parts and so. So from the sawdust trampled street with all its muddy feet that press to early coffee stands. Suppose the description is that from the sawmills, you see, okay, the workers or the laborers who were being engaged in the night shift, now they are coming to the early coffee stands. So there is a kind of a stall, of coffee stall, and the sawdusts are here and there. The muddy feet is always there. Okay, the barefoot or maybe the muddy references, all these things cannot provide you the essential, you see, the very favorable or very you know very positive images to you. And now they're entering into the coffee stands with, now the very important section, with the other masquerades the time resumes. You see, the other masquerades, why it is being incorporated, why this kind of a mask is being used, why the masquerades, actually through this particular kind of an image that Eliot is creating here, with the other masquerades, he is actually opining, he is actually pointing towards the matter of consciousness again. As I mentioned just now, that whenever it is the matter with the morning, so you can find that the consciousness is associated with the masquerades. That means when you are conscious about your society, when you are conscious about your outside world, when you are conscious about your role, okay, and significances, then what happens, that you always wear a kind of a mask, okay, to protect you and also to behave in terms of the typical forms of utilitarianism that is practiced within the society. So the masquerades are actually indicating towards a kind of a corruption, towards a kind of a pollution that is happening to be present within the core of the society. So everywhere you will find that it is indicating towards something negative, as you can see. Okay, this particular image of masquerading, this particular image, the interplay between the conscious and subconscious, subconscious and unconscious, this will be described in Eliot's other poem, that is Rhapsody on a Windy Night. It's a very significant poem regarding this particular concept. Now, he says, with the other masquerades, the time resumes. You see, time resumes. That means it is sometime for some time it was stopped, for some time it was paused, and now it resumes the masquerade. That means it might be possible that during night, the actual part of the human being, it becomes active, whether it is the typical animalistic impulses and desires and the id part in our psyche, that is in work. And then you see that when it comes to consciousness, you wear the masks and ultimately you become a particular human being, with your agreeable or acceptable outlook, as you can see. So with the other masquerades, the time resumes. But when the time resumes, you see, okay, the masquerade and then a pause at the night when your originality comes to the forefront, and then again the morning comes, the time resumes, and you are wearing different kind of masks. The masquerades are there, you are behaving differently, okay. What you behave, actually you do not think that. So that is the fundamental thing that it actually indicates. So with the other masquerades, the time resumes, and then the situation or the particular focus of this particular poem shifts to the matter of prostitution. Okay, there is a one. Okay, Eliot will not provide any particular name here. Here you can find the one. It is completely open-ended, but it actually indicates towards a kind of a prostitute or a person who was forced into organized prostitution. And so here he says, one thinks of all the hands that are raising dingy shades in 1,000 furnished rooms. So the indication towards prostitution. Probably, now think about the one. The one, it can be a kind of an observer. You see, that the observer who actually observes and takes notes of the society. Okay, he is reading the society in general sense. So what happens, one thinks of all the hands that are raising dingy shades in 1,000 furnished rooms. So ultimately the focus regarding the 1,000 furnished rooms, the question comes that what does it implicate? The 1,000 furnished rooms, actually these are the prostitutes' quarters or maybe the brothels. And the hands that are raising dingy shades, it is indicating towards the matter of prostitution. They are trying to, the dingy shades or raising dingy shades, these are actually implicating towards the activities of the prostitutes in there. So one thinks of all the hands that are raising dingy shades in 1,000 furnished rooms. So ultimately in this particular section that I have already mentioned, so here you will find that a kind of the representation of morning twilight is there, and here you will find that it begins in the streets and move towards the furnished rooms. The treatment of consciousness of the observer and the thing observed, the morning, makes the poem a psychological one. So the poem is actually turning towards the psychological part. The coming of consciousness of the morning is related to the waking of the human beings, as if it seems to be. The association of morning breathe with the smell of the stale beer consumed at night rarely creates an atmosphere of, as you can see, it's a kind of an immorality. The sunshine is a glorious birth, wrote Wordsworth, but the break of the day in this poem is not anything glorious. So the to some extent archetypal concept of positivity that have been associated or vested with the morning. Here it is completely being negated. That is why it is a typical modern temperament that is in work. It is just one day and another day that can be found here that is surcharged with displeasing olfactory smells, okay? And the smell of the stakes of the prelude one, as I've mentioned, had left over, and smell of beer preoccupies the thought of the readers. To this is associated the coffee houses there, which are aid of bring life to the consciousness. The revelry of night with its transplaced streets of drunkards, as you can see, is an explicit reference to the moral decadence, obviously, that can be implicated in a holistic, nihilistic world. The visual imagery is associated with the faint smell of beer and the strong coffee fumes. This can be associated with the masquerades. The masquerades are those of urbanity, the masquerades of dirt and squalor, the dance of death, or etc. All these terms can be interpreted here. The revelry of sexual lust and perversion. The hands are raising dingy shades. That these shades refer to victory of the concrete city jungle, as well as triumph of Western civilizations. So all these things can be classified here. But this triumph is not the typical kind of thing, as you can see, who raised his hands to show his love for God. It is not the hand of Moses, as you can see. This triumph is of regression, you see. Then the furnished rooms at the end of the poem, they are preparing for further masquerades where hands can raise to celebrate the doomsday and the regression of human beings. So everything can be classified in terms of something negative. So whenever you will go with this particular poem, as you can see, and as I have mentioned earlier, that these 4 sections of the poems were written in 4 different parts of time. And these disjointed parts have to be, assimilated into a holistic form. So therefore, this particular form is actually indicating towards the morning, but regarding the psychosocial environment, and also the kind of decadence, the moral decadence, the spiritual decadence that is perceptible within the society, all these things have been taken for consideration in this particular section of this poem. Okay, so stay attached. It will be continuing in our next lecture. Thank you.